providers here in the US that are starting to kind of collect data, and both, you know, in real time as well as retrospectively, of women who you know, who have chosen to breastfeed or chest feed. And so we're, you know, one of whom is Alison Agu out of Johns Hopkins, who just recently got a publication on this. And we know that Judy Levinson is also collecting data. And so we hope that, you know, this will kind of lead to more robust, you know, possibly federally funded research in the future. So we're just really grateful for all the work that folks are doing kind of behind the scenes as well. So then we'll just, as a quick note, we have a lot of resources, and we invite you to also drop any resources into the chat that you feel are good for us to be collecting and know about. We'll be doing the same. And one key thing to know is that if you're really interested in this and you haven't already, you can join the HIV and infant feeding listserv that has started, and we'll give information about that shortly. As well as, I just wanted to kind of plug an upcoming program that also is going to provide a lot of great, you know, information with some key thought leaders in the US, that the Well Project is teaming up or partnering with the National HIV Perinatal Hotline for the Perinatal Roundtable, and the title of that event is Updates in Breast and Chest Feeding While Living with HIV, Parent Perspectives and Evolving Practice. And that's going to be taking place on May 24th at 12 p.m. Pacific to 2 p.m. Pacific, and as well as /3 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll drop the link in there if you want to register for that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our team who's been working on this collectively over the years, and Jenna Conley to start and talk about the history of our work here.
Thank you, Krista. My name is Jenna Conley. I'm the communications director for the Well Project, and I've got my phone ringing. Sorry about that. I've been working with the organization since 2007, and I'm really excited to be part of this programming. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes talking about the ways in which the Well Project has been leading in breast and chest feeding and HIV for the last few years. So it started at a 2018 meeting of the Women's Research Initiative on HIV/AIDS, which we colloquially call the WRI meeting. This is a program of the Well Project to advance research and policy around women and HIV, and it brings together thought leaders who represent, really, we try to make it the entire range of fields engaged in this work, including clinical care, HIV research, academia, advocacy, policy, government, pharmaceutical industry, and women living with HIV. In 2018, our meeting focused on addressing the multitude of ways that U=U impacts the lives of women living with and vulnerable to HIV. And as part of that, we included a presentation about whether U=U in breastfeeding. Well, the answer to that question remains not yet for right now. It was evident that this was an area that desperately needed more attention. And it very quickly became clear that, like so many other topics related to women, there wasn't nearly enough information about breast and chest feeding and HIV, neither for parents living with HIV nor for providers. And as many of you will relate to, the information that did exist could be so thoroughly confusing as to render it nearly useless. I'm going to spend just a minute providing a little bit of background. I'm sure others will add to this, and this may be all information that many of you already know, but just in case. While chest and breastfeeding is the standard of care for women living with HIV in low resource settings, it is strongly discouraged for women living with HIV in high resource settings. And I think an important thing to keep in mind as we think about that context is that best is breast messaging in high resource settings tends to be fairly ubiquitous, which creates a really challenging environment. As Krista mentioned, in the US, we have a set of perinatal guidelines that recommend support for women living with HIV who choose to breastfeed, but most people don't know about them, including parents and providers. focusing on eliminating all risk of HIV transmission as the only factor considered when counseling women about infant feeding decisions, it is hugely problematic. It ignores the challenges related to health disparities. It ignores family, cultural, and economic values. And it also completely avoids the topic of potential benefits and advantages of breastfeeding. Further, it's at odds with the autonomy of parents living with HIV and their fundamental right to make informed decisions about their children's care without judgment or interference from providers or government. Given all of this, the WELL Project sought to undertake a series of activities to try to contribute to the need for additional and improved research, policy, and education. We have made a series of presentations on the topic at scientific and community conferences over the last few years, including Adherence 2019, USCHA, the International Workshop on HIV and Women, the Iris House Face of AIDS Conference, and HIV is Not a Crime. We've developed a number of materials on the topic, including fact sheets in both English and Spanish and highly viewed blogs. We will probably be putting links to all of these into the chat as we continue today. We've hosted a number of broadcast events on the topics, including A Girl Like Me Live, and we've issued partner communications to try to ensure that everyone that we're working with is in the loop on these activities. As Krista mentioned, we created a listserv for folks who are interested in engaging in conversation or sharing insights or updates related to HIV and infant feeding. And as Krista plugged already, if you aren't yet part of that and want to be, we'll provide that information in the chat as well if she hasn't already. We've also developed and continue to update a list of providers who are supportive of breast and chest feeding for parents living with HIV. Here again, importantly, if you're not on that list and think you should be, or if you know of someone who you think should be on that list, please let us know. As many of you know, because many of you were part of it, in October 2020, we convened a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral group of experts from the US and Canada in partnership with ICW-NA, who is with us here today, to identify and discuss priorities to ensure that women living with HIV are able to make informed infant feeding decisions. One of the outputs of that meeting, we developed in what we called the expert consensus statement on breastfeeding and HIV in the United States and Canada, which was co-authored by 21 experts. The statement stresses the need for programming to advance research, policy, and educational resources for women and other parents living with HIV and those who care for them. So that's a quick little tour through, tour down memory lane on where we sort of started on work with breastfeeding and chest feeding. And for more on where we're going next, I'm going to hand it over to Cici. Thank you.
Yay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I am Ci Covin, Program Manager here at the WELL Project, pronouns she and her. I am so excited to be doing this work as a woman living with HIV and someone who is currently breastfeeding. This is so exciting. I'm so glad that organizations are here to support the lives of women and birthing parents everywhere. So the WELL Project, we recently launched BEBA, which is Building Equity, Ethics, and Education on Breastfeeding and HIV. This is new programming, which is meant to further advance the work that we've been doing on breastfeeding and chest feeding. BEBA received a 3-year grant from Beeb Healthcare's Positive Action for Women initiative. We plan to address a number of the key programmatic goals that were identified in that expert consensus statement on breastfeeding and HIV in the United States and Canada that Jenna was just speaking about. I just want to insert this note here that the language that we use around this work includes both breastfeeding and chest feeding. While our organization, we work with women, but we also want to include, non-binary individuals and also trans men. The WELL Project does work with both trans and cisgender women. So just wanted to make that note that we're trying to include everyone. We acknowledge that there are multiple terms to describe this process. Ultimately, our work is to foster an environment for policy change and research and to ensure that women living with HIV can experience their fundamental right to make informed, uncoerced infant feeding decisions. To reach these goals, we will be developing educational tools and programming, both for the community and for providers, building leadership among women living with HIV, and working collaboratively with partners across the US. I'm not sure if any of you all have had a chance to view any of our Leadership Exchange Lives Viva edition. The first one happened in December with Allison Agwu. That was a really good one, followed by another good one, which was with Marielle Gross back in February, where we talked health implications. And the next one is going to be in June with Catherine Hanssens from the Center of HIV Law and Policy. So I'm so excited to be here to discuss this with you all and to see the work that everyone else is doing in this area. So I'm going to pass it on over to Olivia now.
Greetings, everyone. Can you all hear me? So good to see everyone here. My name is Olivia Ford. My pronouns are she and they, and I am the editorial director for the Well Project. And actually, as relevant to this conversation, I'm also a longtime trained doula, and I'm a current perinatal health advocate contractor at Birthmark Doula Collective, which is in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I do come to all my work at the Well Project, and especially this our BBUP project with this additional kind of intersecting layer of commitment to supporting the informed choices, rights, agency, and well-being of women and other birthing parents. And of course, the recognition of the tremendous evidence-based benefit of breast and chest feeding to babies and their nursing parents really throughout the lifespan, which could literally be another series of webinars in and of itself. So now many of today's speakers, I have the honor of introducing some really phenomenal folks working with some really powerful organizations that we've partnered with. Many of today's speakers and the organizations, I think Jenna touched on, are longtime partners and collaborators of the Well Project. Many were co-authors of that 2020 consensus statement that we dropped in the chat. And their work really just represents a dazzling range of expertise that speaks to the ways this topic of breast and chest feeding and HIV really overlaps with numerous, just so many concerns to our communities, including Black maternal and infant health, bodily autonomy, criminalization and biased policing, perinatal support, racial, gender, and economic justice, LGBTQ family building, U equals U, of course, with caveats, but also with incredible inspiration from that model. And so much more. Folks will be sharing the work that they're doing or have done, work that intersects with this issue around supporting women and other birthing parents living with HIV in their infant feeding journeys. Folks may also share concerns they may have about the current landscape or conditions that, if they were in place, would make all of our work, or their work in particular, more possible, if that makes sense. And ideas for potential collaboration from whether, that's the circle here or other folks who are witnessing this, this event as well. We welcome and encourage everyone who has questions to use that Q&A function for direct questions, and to drop comments, conversation, kind of like amens and what have you into the chat box, which we're going to be doing our best to monitor across platforms, because we're now also streaming live on our Facebook page. Hi, everybody who's there on Facebook. So we'll hopefully share the conversation between the two as we can. After the brief talks, there's going to be a Q&A and discussion that's not just among the kind of the named speakers, but also we invite and welcome folks to come off of mute and come on video if they like. By raising your hand, you'll see here in the, I believe the they keep moving this hand function around, but I believe it's in your reactions, which is under more in Zoom. You can raise a hand and we'll make you you can make you a co-host so that you can be heard and seen if you wish to also be seen. And that would be really great, just to see more faces, hear more voices, to share your own work or comments about what you've heard here once the kind of brief talks are over. And it's really our hope that this listening session is going to inspire more interested individuals and organizations to see where they might plug in on this issue and to get involved at whatever level they're able. So I am going to name the speakers alphabetically by organization name, noting that those of the T in the title, like us, are under T. And have them introduce themselves and their organizations more fully than and with more kind of relevant points than I ever could. After each speaker, I'll just briefly come off of mute to introduce the next. And I do believe also folks can use, it's a lot of us here and it's kind of like a beautiful array of faces, but I think you can use speaker view if you want to just if you haven't already and you want to just kind of focus on the person who's speaking. So without further ado, we will begin with Cynthia Gutierrez from HIVE. Cynthia, you got the floor.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Cynthia Gutierrez. My pronouns are she, her, and Aryah, and I'm zooming in live from the Ohlone land in East Oakland, California. For those of you who are not familiar with HIVE, since 1989, HIVE has provided preconception and prenatal care to women, people, and couples affected by HIV. Since 2005, all babies born in San Francisco have been free of HIV. Olivia, I hope I maybe have like 5 minutes to kind of go through some points and some notes that I made. But I really want to start off by saying that the way that I approach this work and thinking about breastfeeding and chest feeding and infant feeding is really trying to connect it back to reproductive justice. And Sister Song defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain bodily or personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children in safe and sustainable communities. I say that because this is not, as people, we don't live single issue lives. And I hope that by sharing some of the work that HIVE has done throughout the years on this topic, you can see how we're trying to not only expand on the conversation, but learn in the process and always prioritize those with lived experiences. So we have been doing and being in conversation about breastfeeding and chest feeding for a while now, whether it's been being a part of professional and academic presentations, whether it's writing academic journals. We wrote HIVE wrote an article in 2014 about breastfeeding and HIV infected women in the US. And I can definitely put some of that information in the chat or provide it in a follow-up email. One thing that has also been helpful in these conversations is developing our relationship with like a local milk bank. There's a milk bank here in San Jose, which is within the Bay Area, and having them as a useful resource for folks that want to have that as extra support. One thing that we do in HIVE regularly is have a weekly case conference in which we discuss the medical and social needs of the patients that we are serving. In these case conferences, we are always bringing up, has the topic of breastfeeding and chest feeding been presented to every single patient? Do they have the information that they need to make the most informed decision about their care and their body and their baby? What questions are left? Like, are there things that we can be more explicit in? We can do more counseling. And I'm so grateful that we have our medical director, Dr. Deb Cohan, on this webinar, who has been doing this type of counseling for so many years. She shared with me how there's currently a patient who is 29 weeks pregnant, and as often as that patient would like to have the conversation, Deb is in those questions and in that discussion and just trying to be a support for that person so they can make the best decision for themselves and their baby. Another thing that I would love to highlight is the importance of having a web presence and being a resource through social media. Our website has a resource, very limited resources on infant feeding. And we're actually in the process of updating our entire website to have more information on breastfeeding and chest feeding. We really love to give kudos to the Well Project because we see you all as being really innovative and always bringing this conversation to the forefront. One thing that I think is really important in terms of not only our website, but this concept of storytelling. I personally, besides being affiliated with HIVE as the program manager, I'm also a full spectrum doula, I'm a storyteller, I'm a consultant. And one thing that I have found that has truly changed people's hearts and minds has been this concept of storytelling. To be able to have someone who's actually gone through these experiences, someone like the incredible Cici that we have here, who is so transparent and generous with her experience and her information, and be in conversation with others. And so how can we at HIVE continue promoting storytelling? We have this blog called Share Your Story, and we currently do not have information on breastfeeding and chest feeding from that personal narrative. And my hope, and actually my goal for this year, is to have more of those testimonies or stories on our website, on our social media, because it really resonates deeper with folks when you hear it from someone who's actually been through that experience. Another point that I want to share is that we are finding that, at least HIVE, we're discovering that more and more centers are wanting to have their patients, their birthing people who decide to breastfeed or chest feed to now sign informed consent. And to us, this is super problematic. And I hope that maybe there's a chance that other folks in this webinar who have more information on this or would like to discuss this, how this is just another form of surveillance and policing people as they choose to breastfeed or chest feed. Finally, as I kind of wrap up my section here with HIVE, one thing that our program and our clinic program is trying to talk about and have conversations about is this question around how do we change the narratives of people living with HIV as causing harm through risk of transmission and narratives as medical providers as saviors. And that's something that we talk about. How do we dismantle that only a certain individual, a certain clinic, a certain provider are the experts of this, when it truly should be the people with the lived experience? How do we continue providing more peer-to-peer information, peer support from other non-medical staff, such as doulas, such as patient navigators, community members, whatever title that these folks will have in their organizations or community. And so these are just some thoughts that we have, some ways that we want to be better, some ways that we want to improve our current materials, and just super grateful to be in conversation with you all around this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for being here. Next, we've got Martha Cameron from the International Community of Women Living with HIV North America chapter.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well, and it's so great to be on this platform, and so great to have this forum where we can continue to speak about breastfeeding and what this means. And you know, when I had been thinking about the journey of ICW into this, ICW in itself is a global organization, and then they began a chapter in the US. But even before the US chapter was started, they had been dealing with a lot of advocacy around reproductive justice issues. So when, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name, the previous speaker from HIVE talked about the issue of breast and chest feeding being absolutely about reproductive justice. It is very real. For women living with HIV, we have faced issues of forced and coerced sterilization, and you know, then this issue of being denied the ability to breastfeed here in the US. So these things are global and not just local. But one of the, I think, important things that I wanted to talk about today, and I also really do want to give kudos to the WELL Project for the continued work and for setting up this forum so that we can continue to think about how this work can not only be sustained, but I really do believe that the next step in sort of what is going on around breast and chest feeding is the education of those people that provide the service. And strengthening that, because as much as we can strengthen and educate the women living with HIV, they will end up with these barriers when they go into services that are supposed to support and help navigate them through their pre and postpartum period. But one of the things I wanted to kind of focus on today is something that my sister from HIVE actually raised, which is this idea of the storytelling. And, you know, one of the things that came out of our experience with Heather O'Connor being on staff with us, and our interaction with Cici, and our interaction with the women on the Milky movement, is that there is some trauma that has led up to and has been perpetuated through the pre and postpartum period that is a story that is very difficult to tell. The journey of a woman living with HIV sometimes actually starts with trauma. And we have had this intervention where we begin to understand that ACEs, you know, adverse childhood experiences, or other vulnerabilities that we all know that especially communities of color face, end up leading to the risks that are associated with issues like HIV. And there are those that may have had vertical transmission, that have had to deal with the sort of the mental health issues and traumas that are associated with being HIV positive. And then you come to this really big event that is you making the decision to be pregnant as an HIV positive woman, you actually going through this period and being treated in a certain way by medical providers. And then you also having to face this potential trauma of breast and chest feeding. And as we have been doing these other trauma interventions that actually build the strength and resiliency of women living with HIV, and then also help them take control of their narrative, right? Help them tell their story in such a way that it helps them build strength and resiliency and overcome some of the traumas that they may have faced, but also builds the narrative in such a way that they can then tell the story, help somebody else, and potentially even become an advocate for the issue. And so, you know, one of the things that we as ICW are going to do is hold these programs. It's a program that is actually developed by a woman named Vanessa Johnson that you all may be familiar with. It's called Common Threads, but ICW-NA has done an adaptation of it that is called Healing Together, and it will help take some of these women through this journey that helps bring the collective experiences, especially of women of color, in terms of their early trauma, their trauma of literally going through a pregnancy as an HIV positive woman, and then that postpartum period that includes both chest and breastfeeding. And we're hoping that this can help develop the stories for the women, because I think, as has been said already, if we don't effectively tell this story in order to change the trajectory of what is going on in the US, then you know, I'm not sure how else it will convince, you know, providers, especially if it's taking a little while to change those guidelines. It's our stories that will change the trajectory of our journey and our health. So that is kind of like what we are going to focus on. And we hope that by doing this intervention for the women, it will help bring the stories, whether the stories are brought to the World Project website or whether the stories are brought to the HIVE website. That's one thing. But the other thing that's important is to always consider this digital divide, and that not everybody accesses the internet and the website. And we're hoping that these women will use these stories in their own communities and with their own circle of influence, so that we can continue to do sort of this grassroots work. But those stories really have, for you to ask somebody to tell their story without helping build their capacity to sort of work through some of their traumas and some of the vulnerabilities and some of the issues that led up to this, it can be really, really tough. So we're going to be able to do that work to contribute to the idea that we want each and every one of these women to tell their story and be able to use it in their circle of influence. Thank you so much.
Excellent, Martha. Thank you so much. So many important points. Next, we have Davina Connor from Prevention Access Campaign. Davina, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting all the wonderful women that are here. I just want to say really quick that these conversations on chest feeding and breastfeeding need to be had more often than people talk about it. So I give kudos to the Well Project for continuing these conversations that need to be had. I am Dee Connor, the Community Engagement Outreach Specialist for Prevention Access Campaign. I am going to be brief. I want to say that PAC has been working since its founding in 2016 to clarify the risk of HIV transmission when someone has an undetectable viral load. And so far, we know that science has proven that an undetectable viral load is 100% effective for sexual transmission. But however, we understand that this can sometimes be confusing for other forms of transmission. Prevention Access Campaign has advocated alongside the Well Project for further research into breastfeeding and chest feeding and increased agencies of parents living with HIV. But stigma against people who live with HIV could put parents at risk who want to breast and chest feed their child at risk of an unequal and unjust by child protective services, especially parents of color. And parents who live with HIV do have options to breastfeed their babies, but at what cost? So we must talk to our providers about U equals U, every single one of us. But Prevention Access Campaign will continue to work alongside the Well Project and support them in any way we can. And we hope that every single one of you here today will do the same too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dee. Can you hear me? Apologies.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your words. I froze for a second because so when I came back, you're just already finished up. Thank you again so much. Next, we have Deandra Willis from the Afia Center.
Hello, everybody. Hello. So I'm just giving a disclaimer right now. I am very nasally in Dallas, Texas. This weather's crazy, okay? So I'm going to be really, really brief with the information I give you. So I bring you greetings from the Afia Center here in Dallas. We are located here in Dallas. And before I start, I also want to honor our executive director, Ms. Marsha Jones. And I want to honor Ms. Helen Zimba also, because she's the one that really, really champions this work, my HIV work. And so she allowed me to speak today because this is normally what she normally does. Okay, so just a little bit about the Afia Center. We was established in response to the increased disparities between HIV incidence worldwide and the extraordinary prevalence of HIV among Black women and girls in Texas. TAC is unique in that it is the only reproductive justice organization in North Texas founded, directed, and led by Black women folk. Our mission is to serve Black women and girls by transforming their relationship with their sexual and reproductive health through addressing the consequences of reproductive oppression. Also, so I bring to the space as a full spectrum doula. And so we also have a full spectrum doula collective team that is powered by the Afia Center. And so I'm going to speak a little bit more towards how we serve Black birthing folks that live with HIV. A little bit about our collective. We are Southern Roots Doula Collective. We was created with the health and well-being of the mothers at heart. Our services are provided by caregivers who also understand that childbirth matters and Black mothers matter. The goal is to offer quality doula services to Black women, women of color, and low-income families who otherwise would not be able to afford doula care. Our full spectrum doula care includes labor, postpartum, abortion, unintentional pregnancy loss, health care outside of a clinic setting, and much more. To win, we've got to be all in, and we are. We serve birthing folks from the beginning of the reproductive scale to the end of the reproductive scale, and that's in any way that they see us, needing to be served. Also, some of the things that we bring, so we don't separate those that live with any diagnosis as it relates to how they are served. But some of the unique things that we do work with some of our birthing folks that live with HIV is just being sure that they have a treatment plan and they're on top of their treatment plan, making sure giving them the resources and the tools to be able to talk with their providers, to be able to advocate for themselves, because we know that, as the women before me have stated, we know that if they are pretty much undetectable and they're on their treatments, that it will cause a lot of the other stigmas and no's and things that doctors like to do. It kind of put it under the radar. They don't have any, too many issues. So we advocate for the optimal birth of their choice. And we know being able to advocate for that is also making sure that they're on their treatments. So that is some of the unique things that we do. We don't separate. We don't look at them as, oh, this is a certain person that we have to work with in a certain way. It's just more so meeting everybody that we serve where they are, and we build a plan accordingly. We just really honor what that birthing choice is, and we are very confidential in the way that we hold them and the information that we hold. And that's for anybody. It's just, we don't go by a diagnosis. The diagnosis is not who you are. We're confidential in everything that we do. We're confidential in any information that is given to us, and we meet that birthing person exactly where they are. So I am excited about organizations like the Willis Project that is inclusive on their language and held in opportunities like this for people to learn, because it's not always a subject that we hear about a lot, and it's not a lot of organizations that do the work that us on this call, that we do. So it's important, and it is a topic that needs to be like normalized nowadays, so that it can dismantle the stigma that is going on, and people can live a pleasurable life and, be parents in the way that they want to be parents, and be served in the way that they deserve to be served. So I can drop our information in the chat. And if you want to know more about the Afia Center, about Southern Roots, I will get that information to you. You can check us out. We have a lot of things coming, a lot of events that's coming that talks about reproductive justice, talk about birth justice and what it means, because this conversation today is a big part of reproductive justice. So thank you, Olivia. Thank you, the Willis Project, and everybody for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for being here and for your phenomenal work. Next, we have Catherine Hanssens from the Center for HIV Law and Policy.
Hi, everybody. I'm so honored to be part of this panel, to be included in it, and I just want to join others in giving major props to the Well Project for really consistently honoring and recognizing the work of others in this field, and really making affirmative efforts to collaborate and to expand the work and make those kind of connections. And I think it's long overdue. I'm the founding director of CHLP. We fight discrimination at the intersection of HIV, race, health status, disability, class, sexuality, and gender identity expression. And we do that with a focus on criminal and public health systems, although we go broader than that. That's our primary focus. And we do that work by supporting movement building that seeks to amplify the power of communities and individuals to mobilize themselves for change that's rooted in racial, gender, and economic justice. We pursue legal advocacy, creation of cross-issue partnerships. We have an online resource center that has thousands of materials, including a bunch of things on women. We have a women advocacy resource connection on our website, and I'm going to give you the link to it there. I have to say, as I'm listening to the women speaking here, Cynthia, Deandra, Dee, Martha, I have to say, I get more and more pissed off. And I'm pissed because this is like this, the fact that we have to talk about this at all in 2022 makes me so angry. It brings tears to my eyes. The first time I actually represented a woman who was threatened with removal of her children because she wanted to make her own choices about when and how to take antiretrovirals and breastfeeding was more than 20 years ago. And the US Public Health Service's recommendations on pregnancy used to emphasize that regardless of what a provider thought, ultimately the choice is with a woman. And I do think that the storytelling is really important. I wonder when people think about the way that we deify childbirth, in certain communities where if somebody's pregnant and they show up to their providers, work with or talk to or am friends with, talk about the first conversation with the provider, even somebody they know being, well, did your partner know? I mean, there is this automatic, this initial reaction to a woman as if they are criminal. And it proceeds all the way down the line in terms of treatment choices, all the way through breastfeeding. It's infuriating. To me, it's symptomatic of the way women get treated in the society more generally and how they are treated specifically in HIV advocacy, policy, federal and state organizations, and the ASOs that represent them. I mean, there is plenty of reason to be marching in the streets around some of this stuff. It is way beyond time for federal and state agencies to stand up and say what makes sense. And I mean, I can tell you from doing, representing women in court in the late 80s and early 90s, infectious disease specialists were standing in court explaining to judges the meaning of viral load. And back then, 20 years ago, we knew infectious disease doctors could stand up and say that this woman's choice regarding whatever the choice was related to her reproductive health was a reasonable one and one that should be supported. So I'm going to leave it off at that. I guess I think there's a lot that we need to hear from the other people on this panel about what it is specifically that we should be doing, what kind of organizing and advocacy we should be doing, and how all of the other members of our communities who aren't necessarily women should be joining this group to really press for some clarity. I mean, how many years have we been asking for US Public Health Services and the CDC to simply clarify what's going on. How long will it take them to recognize that women come here from other countries where they've been told they should breastfeed? And then they come here and they hear something else. I mean, why is there not a sense of urgency about responding to this? I mean, the answer is because it's women and because there is this reflex reaction to women as vectors of disease. And it's just not acceptable. And I'm just going to shut up on that last point.
Excellent, Catherine. Important charge. Thank you so much. Last but certain, I see snaps coming. Last but absolutely certainly not least, we have Aryah Lester from Transgender Strategy Center. Aryah, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hello. It's really great to be a part of this esteemed panel. A few of the ladies I've known for years, like Cece and Dee. And I am Aryah Lester. I'm here from the Transgender Strategy Center. And the Well Project has been a trusted partner of ours since our inception. And for me personally, I've worked with the Well Project for I think about 5 years, Krista, or maybe more than that. And that experience was one in which the inclusion of TGNC people within the conversations that we have when we're talking about families and planning and women, it's always been included, and that's something that we really respect and try to uplift, and we would like to see it replicated throughout many women's organizations and also women's funders around the country and around the world. And well, here at the Transgender Strategy Center, we have two main areas in which we focus on. One is we're a grant maker for trans, gender nonconforming led organizations, specifically focusing on BIPOC led ones. We offer free technical assistance and capacity building to these organizations and other organizations, even those that we do not fund. That's our other area, our capacity building, where we really build out orgs that are looking to really build out their foundations, get to learn more about budgeting and finance and grant writing and administrative systems and things like that. We also do leadership development and education, but one thing that we're really trying to focus on that we're in development of lately is for family planning and reproductive health when it comes to transgender and gender nonconforming individuals. And that's why these conversations are important, because we've been left out of it when it comes to providers, when it comes to medical research. Like for one, when you're looking at our high HIV rates just across the board, trans masculine presenting individuals are completely overlooked most times, even though they are very sexually active. A lot of them are MSM, or men who have sex with men, you know, and so there's a lot of pregnancies that can happen within our trans masculine communities, but yet there's not a lot of community organizational support when it comes to that. You have special cases like a trans woman that can be actually sterile, but then able to breastfeed a child, you know, that they have through whatever means. And so I really appreciate having the space to uplift our communities when it comes to breast and chest feeding. I saw a question in there of why we call it chest feeding. You know, like CPR, we do CPR on anyone, we call it chest compressions, no matter if it's female, trans, you know, male. So chest is just a really neutral way of regarding the area in which many different people, no matter what their gender identity is, may utilize for feeding a child. And so when it comes to our high HIV rates, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in addressing our community. And there's a lot of work to be done with language justice, you know, just in those types of terms. Just when we start using the right type of language, we start attracting the right type of people that really need the information and education that we have to offer. And so with that, I thank you, and I thank you all at the Well Project, Krista, Jenna, and Olivia, and Cece.
Thank you. I was gonna just quickly, Olivia, jump in. I realized that Carson was also, I don't know if Carson, if you wanted to talk, I think we're.
Carson's just here to take notes for us.
Okay,
So
okay.
they're not gonna,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thanks. Back to you, Olivia.
No, thank you for that, because I was, yeah, for that clarity, because I wasn't sure too. And Aryah, no, thank you so much for being here. Absolutely our pleasure. So wonderful to work with you and with all of you. At this point, we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, which I can go ahead and read, and we can kind of put them to, put them to all of our speakers. But really, at this point, there's so much expertise in this room, in this larger circle. So if people want to raise hands, either to answer the, sort of to contribute answers to these questions that are here, or to ask your own questions, or to just comment about your own work, let's open up the floor. So yeah, hopefully everyone just kind of holler if for some reason you don't see the raised hand function, but it should be under more or reactions. But anyway, yeah, just somehow indicate to us that you have something to say. I see you both say, I do see your hand raised. I see that it's working, which is good. So we'll start with questions, and we'll kind of start with the speakers responding to the questions. And both say it looks like you are you're off mute and able to speak, which is wonderful. So now, first question I've got here in the Q&A. I think this is a follow-up for a couple people who mentioned this point. It's from Robin Gordon. When people decide to breast or chest feed and are asked to sign an informed consent, what exactly does that mean? And this is just putting it to panelists if anyone wants to respond to that. I think it was mentioned a couple of times as an aspect of people's practice and possibly a concern.
I'm happy to just kind of.
Oh, okay.
No, Martha, please.
I just wanted to contribute to that. I'm not the one that mentioned it, but I know that we have come across women that have talked about this as an issue. And it can actually be either an informed consent or an actual, and I forget what the name of that document is, where the doctor sort of removes all liability away from him, kind of like when you discharge yourself from the hospital and, so the doctor. But usually my understanding with an informed consent happens when you're acknowledging that you're HIV positive, you're acknowledging, as you were saying, that you are not to have sexual, sometimes it's in North Carolina, for example, it's very explicit that you will inform your partner and inform any provider that will come in contact with you that you're HIV positive. And I remember when I started getting care in North Carolina, this alarmed me because I didn't realize that this was still happening. And as was said before, that is used against you when, as Catherine was saying, in all these sort of criminalization issues where it can come right back to this and say you had acknowledged, you knew that you were HIV positive, and so on and so forth. So we have to be very careful when we're signing that informed consent. And in one particular case, the client didn't even know that they were being included in a particular research that was collecting their information. So we always advise people just to, if you don't understand the paperwork that you're signing, do not sign it right there and then. Make sure you take it with you and get consultation before you sign it.
I would raise my hand, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. I just wanted to, I wanted to say yes, that you don't have to. A lot of times those consent forms are, as a legal practical matter, they don't really do anything in terms of liability, but I don't sign them. I advise people to edit them, cross things out, and but that it's, yes, don't sign them, don't acknowledge anything. And if you have questions, I think Martha's advice is excellent. Take it home with you. And I mean, you can always call CHLP or another organization like CHLP in your area, or some of the folks on this call who've been managing and working with clients in this kind of issue for years.
Ah, excellent.
I wanted to add to that also. That's a part of birthing with a doula. Is being able to like so when we work with our birthing folks, it don't matter what it is, whatever a doctor provider tell them, like it's okay to say, give me a minute, let me read over this. Give me a minute, let me consult with whoever so that I can understand this a little, so I can be more of an informed decision maker, because a lot of times those papers are used for scare tactics and they want you to just sign them, and even go so far to say, hey, it's okay to fire that provider. They work for you. So that's the best thing about working with a doula. It's not just the labor part. It's about it's about everything, that whole entire journey. But that are some of the things, like the uniqueness of working with a doula, that helps you in those areas.
Absolutely excellent. Yeah,
I think we had
And,
Cece and
oh.
Deb Cohn were both gonna say something too about this.
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you. So when I hear of a consent or anything, it just makes it sound like really legal. And I don't know if I had to sign a consent before getting the support to breastfeed, whether or not I would have signed it. But the first time that I ever heard of one was from Judy Levison. We just presented last week for National Women and Girls HIV Awareness Day. And she presented it at that time. And just to see the type of things that she had listed on the form, it's actually an agreement and waiver of responsibility regarding breastfeeding and HIV. So just taking those perinatal guidelines and kind of outlining everything. Like I'll take this plan with me to the hospital and have the person sign it. Or if I develop mastitis, I will not breastfeed. Just making sure that that person understands everything. And where it can be something that is a little intimidating and frightening sometimes. Judy spoke about how it actually helped one of her clients before, where DHS, CPS was called on the individual. And when they showed up, that person was able to present to them that they had this waiver that was signed, or this agreement that was signed by her doctor, and that her doctor was already on board with what she had chosen to do with her body. So where it can be something that can be intimidating, I think that it can also be beneficial in other points. That's all.
Thank you so much. I think I may just be showing up as my mailbox. I don't know how to change the visual,
Yeah,
but at any rate, there's a person behind the mailbox. I'm really honored to be learning from and alongside all of you, and honor all the work that everyone on this call has done for so many years. And in terms of the issue of a consent form, there are several points, and Cici, totally with you on the point of that. Sometimes it can be helpful, like it's almost like a checklist to make sure that we as providers have talked through all the details and the nuances. And it's also something written where for some people, people learn in different ways. That said, I think more often it can be used as a tool of coercion, not just in this setting, but also more generally. And it's used when something that's being done is seen as not standard of care in this case. So meaning, like, formula feeding, no one would ask someone, a person living with HIV, to sign a consent form, even though obviously there are some potential risks of formula feeding. No one would do that, right? Because we've, in the US, up until this point, have like a standard of care that people are not supposed to, and I say this in quotes, chest or breastfeed. So veering away from that standard of care, again, I say in quotes, we as a medical establishment feel compelled to say, you know, to have someone sign something saying that they understand they're veering from standard of care. And it's incredibly intimidating, and there's never enough time to like truly go through a consent form. And I really uplift, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting your name, but the woman who's a doula who talked about the importance of doulas. So yes, you know, always take time, you know, try not to sign something right away without reading it. And there's so much pressure. There's time pressure. There are power dynamics, you know, between the medical provider and the patient. And oftentimes the doula can really disrupt the hierarchy in a way that's really helpful and healing for the patient.
Thank you, Deb. And Deb, as I mentioned, is the medical director at HIVE. I'm really grateful that you're here today. A couple of things that I was talking about. Yes, like I totally think that we in like the medical setting and the medical industrial complex, we need to be more intentional about having doulas and advocates be a part of the entire experience, from having them present for prenatal care and postpartum care, having them more integrated in the entire care team. So that's one, first and foremost. Second of all, one thing I didn't get a chance to mention is that HIVE was a convener of a summit, in a virtual summit in 2020, where we talked about Black and Indigenous people of color and the Family Justice Summit. And what that entailed was, what is the state of CPS, or the family regulation system, in San Francisco? I bring this topic up because there are so many stories at San Francisco General Hospital, or even just any like clinic or hospital setting, as you can imagine, around the country, where pregnant people are in so much fear of disclosing their choices, their medical choices, in this case, their choice to breastfeed or chest feed, anything to do with like their reproductive health, because of the fear that CPS, the family regulation system, will get involved. There will be a case open, and their child, their baby, multiple children could potentially be taken away. And so I bring up that concept of informed consent, and really appreciate Martha and Deb like elaborating on it, but more around have us just start thinking about, because I know we're limited at time, around what does it mean to acknowledge that people living with HIV who decide to get pregnant and start a family are in fear of CPS, are in fear of being separated from their baby, are in fear of the stigma that comes with having a diagnosis, and all the things in between. And so it's just something to like just put out there, how we continue being advocates and supporters of keeping families together, and whatever that looks like, and not having the state get involved when it's truly none of their business.
Cynthia, I wanted to comment on that also. So because I can always speak to what we do as Southern Roots. So one thing that we do to make sure we're not perpetuating further perpetuating the harm is that internal resource group for those type of situations, just being connected in a way that, you know, that protects those birthing people. Because just like you said, a lot of birthing folks will choose not to disclose just out of fear of what could happen with their family and their children. And so just part of our intake is holding space for the, you know, for birthing folks to be able to disclose the information that we need to protect them. And with our vetted, trusted resource list, we use those and have those people on standby, depending on like where these people will be birthing at, and giving them other options. So a lot of times it may not be a hospital, it may be an out of hospital birth that's perfect for this situation, and being able to be connected to providers that are outside of hospitals that can give this birthing person the optimal birth of their choice. So I would say part of that answer would be that other organizations have a vetted resource list, a vetted group of resources that you can directly connect birthing folks to. So it'll take away that middleman, it'll take away that fear that they have of me saying, oh, you can go to this, to HIVE, but I can also say, you can go to HIVE and talk to Cynthia, because now I have a connection with Cynthia versus me taking her through all the different things that, the different processes that it may happen at HIVE. And so that takes away that fear and the shame that people have.
Absolutely, that was amazing. I don't want to miss if there are any other points on that kind of line of question or that topic. Obviously, people can definitely keep it going in the chat, but I see we have another question around dismantling narratives, which I definitely think there'll be a lot of folks here that can speak to some of this. I'm going to read this question from the chat. It's from Vakita Casada. Thank you so much for being here, Vakita. I definitely agree with Cynthia's question about dismantling narratives. I also wonder, how can we dismantle the narrative? It's interesting. The sole or main reason for women wanting to breastfeed is due to fear of disclosure. I know this is a reason, a very real reason, but it isn't the only one. There are women and birthing parents whose loved ones know their status and still choose to breast or chest feed for other equally valid reasons. How do we dismantle this narrative? I'm curious what folks have to say in response to that. And then after, yes, and then Bose has her hand up. So then once we respond to this, I see Bose. But go ahead, everyone.
I'm not sure if there's somebody in a queue, so I don't want to, take too much space, Olivia. If there's somebody else, I can speak after them.
No, you're good. I think in response to this question, yeah, you're the.
Okay. So it's actually a loaded question, because there is so much history that is involved that you can bring up to answer that question. There is just the history that we've spoken about with regards to breastfeeding in this country. I was watching a racial justice presentation that was done by PWN, and one of the trigger pictures that were in there that they actually warn you before you see it is of a Black woman breastfeeding a white baby, because that's how women were used in those days as well, right? So how did we move from breastfeeding being the standard of care with all its health benefits to formula being best? How did we make that transition? And over and above that, there is this other really horrible story, that I always say, the Tuskegee of breastfeeding, where you hear about this doctor that, got these 3 triplets and essentially did these triplets never survived, and there were children of color, and he used them to essentially test out and the whole formula feeding issue, and so there are all these complex issues. I'll add to that the issue of just culture. I, as an immigrant woman, don't want to breastfeed just because I was told to, but that's, to me, that's how I just wanted to, I feel this connection. I birthed this child, and I want this connection, and I want to breastfeed, and that should be a right of anybody that wants to breast or chest feed, And so dismantling all of this really starts with what we're doing. Everybody has spoken. It has to be a conversation. We have to break down and look at this through a reproductive, racial justice, and then a basic human rights issue of just this idea that breast milk was considered the standard of care at some point, and it should just be a choice for anybody that wants to breast or chest feed. It's a human right. They should be a joint decision-making process and all that. But to break those narratives is having conversations and from very different angles. And we wouldn't have time for that today. But I can tell you that the intervention that we're going to do breaks down those issues for women, because until you confront the racial justice and reproductive issues and then overcome them, it's very difficult to tell the story.
I'll say that for me to make the decision to breastfeed or not, it was because I wanted to. Like, I don't have a reason to give you why I wanted to breastfeed my child. I know that there's something I wanted to do with my first one, and I was advised that I could not, or the conversation just totally missed me, period. And I wanted to. My birth control has a 99% efficacy rate. The risk of transmission while undetectable is less than 1%. That's the same thing said two different ways and interpreted by society in two completely different ways.
And that's not to mention, I mean, we encourage you all to go to look at those leadership exchange lives that CC is doing and future ones. But I think, both the one with Allison Agu and Marielle Gross are really important, and especially with Marielle to kind of really emphasize what we spoke about earlier, the health benefits to mother and child for breastfeeding, and long-term and short-term, and then possible health long-term and short-term risks to mother and child by not breastfeeding, and how that is not talked about really at all, and the importance of that. So just to get more information on that, go check out those leadership exchanges. And Olivia.
Yeah. Does anyone else? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to see if anyone else wants to speak to that point around shifting narratives. And of course, we can keep that thread going. And I'm going to move on to a couple of kind of medical questions that are in the that are here in the Q&A. First, and I think they're from the same person. It's both anonymous attendee. I'm not sure if anonymous attendee you want to, kind of come off mute or anything like that, but I will read the questions here. So, are babies put on any antiretroviral medication during breast or chest feeding? Is this part of a medical protocol? There's another question. Is there research underway that you can share information how to enroll to confirm whether U=U in breast or chest feeding as there was for sexual transmission? And as a practical matter, what is the safest way to breast or chest feed? Should both breast and chest feed or an infant be on antiretrovirals? That's an interesting question. I think there's some conversation about that even among providers who support breast or chest feeding for parents living with HIV. I am not the right expert to speak to that question, but I put it to the floor. I think that Krista, I think you want to go ahead and speak to the guide.
Yeah, I mean, if Deb wants to come off mute and talk a little bit, but I mean, so we're not medical providers, but so in there, in very plain terms, there is not a lot of research. There's no kind of official NIH funded research around breast and chest feeding and HIV. There is some providers that are doing kind of their own data collection to provide some evidence that will hopefully lead to further research. And that's one of the parts of the work that we're doing, is to really try and push that forward, because until we have more research in a high resource setting, and to see if really we can get to even less than 1% transmission, which is very low if a woman has an undetectable viral load, if we can say U=U. And so there is a lot of questions, but I think the short answer is that there is research that was done in Africa and other countries called the PROMISE study, and there's others that did show, which is where we get the less than 1% data. And then in terms of the antiretroviral medication, again, because of the lack of research for mother, yes, it is definitely encouraged for adherence and frequent medical visits and testing and undetectable viral load. And then, there are varying protocols for what the baby receives. And so I don't know if Deb, you want to speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Just briefly, what I will say is, at least in the US, there is not consensus, even among those of us who are supportive of people breast chest feeding. And it ranges from, and just to reinforce what you said, Krista, yes, that the person who is breast chest feeding, that they stay on meds, if for no other reason, for their own health, and there is benefit in terms of reducing the risk of transmission. And then in addition to that, the question is what to give infant. And just like Cici said, there's kind of the camp of people who think just giving the baby one medication, usually that's nevirapine, versus giving baby triples, so 3 meds, kind of like what adults would get for post-exposure prophylaxis. Many people believe that giving triples is probably not necessary, particularly if the person living with HIV has an undetectable viral load. But this is like the hot topic, and different centers are doing different things. And I don't think it's going to be like codified as a guideline anytime soon. So I think it's going to be a like institution provider by provider sort of thing for a little while longer.
And,
Gotcha.
yeah, I just wanted to add that I think even when sort of ICW-NA came into this work, this is where we were coming from. And to me, it's really unfortunate because we were coming from a global perspective. And the guidelines for breastfeeding, and I deliberately use that word just because the World Health Organization guidelines, specifically use breastfeeding, were established over 20 years ago. And this has been the standard of care in low resource settings. And that PROMISE study that has been acknowledged by even providers here and the World Health Organization, which is not a small organization, was a vetted study. I mean, this is not, this is not a small sort of research or, something that was done, that cannot be recognized internationally. And the reason I say that is when we first, even partnered with the World Project over this issue, the idea was to push for the research. And to me, it speaks to the larger issue of this issue of women living with HIV not being prioritized in this country. And especially because the higher burden of this disease falls among women of color. So it falls back to that issue of racial justice. When they did U equals U, it was actually, some of the studies were done in Africa before the partner study was brought here and so on and so forth. But somehow they haven't just been able to do that for women and for women living with HIV who would like to breastfeed. That is the only thing. But and yet the studies were done, and because they involved gay brothers and sisters, for women it hasn't been done, and so that is what, in fact, we at the DC Center for AIDS Research, ICW has been trying to push for an academic partnership that tries to pursue this, and we're making headway. But I can tell you, Olivia, and I know Debbie just said, there's all this, that is our vocation. We are going to fight until this guideline is changed, because the issue is just not recognizing existing research, and the issue is not prioritizing women living with HIV in this country. So we will continue to fight until that sentence is changed in those guidelines. I don't care what they say. We will, and I say this loving and appreciating the support of providers like you and Judy Levine and Layla. We love you, and we couldn't do this without you, but we will continue fighting.
Yes, absolutely. I see lots of applause in the chat. Thank you so much, Martha. Bose, you've had your hand up for a while, so I wanted to give you the floor if you have comments or questions or want to share experiences. Bose, Global Ambassador of the Well Project. Yeah, I see you coming off mute. All right, the floor is yours, my love.
Oh, thank you so much, Olivia. And it's so amazing listening to everyone that has spoken so far. I have an issue presently. As a mentor mother who goes to, I volunteer as a mentor mother in one of the clinics here in Abuja. And I know I deal with pregnant women almost every day. And sometimes I get a handful of some of them who are HIV positive, who have chosen to breastfeed. I know of recent, there's a young lady who got us through the Well Project online, and we've been communicating so far. And initially, she told me she's not going to breastfeed. She have made a decision not to breastfeed. But yesterday, she called me and told me that she have chosen to breastfeed. And I already have pre-informed her, I've given her some information that she needs, and I also refer her to the Well Project site where she can read up-to-date information on breastfeeding. Then I asked her this question, your viral load. You know, I know the U=U has a major role to play when you want to breastfeed as a mother living with HIV. And we never had that opportunity. I never had that opportunity 15 years ago. 12 years ago, I never had that opportunity. I was told not to breastfeed my kids, and that I would be putting their life at risk if I choose to breastfeed them. And for this young lady, treatment, now that has been mentioned in some of the questions addressed here this evening. ARVs for babies. And I asked her this question because she is due this month. She's due to have this baby this month. And I wish I could go and see her in Kwara. And she told me she has been given the tablet for the baby. And I'm like, pills for baby. So she was told if she chooses not to breastfeed, she should crush and dissolve this with water and give the baby. But if she chooses to breastfeed, she should crush and dissolve with the breast milk and give the baby. And I think she was given this DTG. And to me, I'm like, they said they ran out of syrup. So I don't know why they'll be giving an infant that they don't even know the baby's weight yet. And I know these drugs are being given due to the baby's weight. Here in this part of the world, you have no choice. They give you what they want to give you. And you have no say. So to either reject or you accept it. So they throw what they have at you. So I kept wondering since yesterday, how would they give this mother tablet? How will she measure, you know, to know what to give this baby and what not to give this baby? And who is going to take responsibility for this? So for me, it has been an issue that has been bothering me since yesterday. I spoke with her and I told her once I'm through with this meeting, I'm going to call her back and at least from all what I've learned so far in this webinar, I'm going to be sharing some with her. Hopefully that will help her too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah,
Bose.
thank you so much for that, sharing that case. Go ahead, Krista. I'm sorry.
No, I saw it. Catherine has her hand raised, and then we got 2 minutes left. So, Catherine.
I just, thanks, Krista. I just had a real quick request both to the panelists and anyone listening in. If there are particular types of resources of a legal guidance or fact sheet nature that would be useful to your work, if you could let the fine folks at Well Project know, or let me at CHLP know, or put it in the chat, that would be great, you know, because you all know better than, certainly know better than I, what is most useful at this point in the particular advocacy or personal obstacles you're facing. So that would be real, real helpful. But that's it for me.
No, that's great. That's excellent. And looking forward to sort of continuing that conversation around what kinds of resources. Because I'm sure, I know that there are those needs. Oh, I see. Yeah. Yep. And Deandra's saying yes. We'll sort of collect the information from the chat and make sure that any folks who haven't sort of grabbed responses from the chat do have access to that info and can be in touch with one another and just and keep this conversation going and kind of move some of these next steps. Speaking of next steps, we are at time. I don't know if anyone has any final very quick thoughts that they want to share. Yeah, Krista.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. This is a great first kind of super collaborative discussion, and hope everyone learned something. If you could take the survey that's in the, drop the link in the chat and let us know just, any thoughts of other information you would like to have, what you found most important. Just know that we are taking all this information on, working collaboratively with everyone that we can bring on board to continue to move all these pieces forward, including education for women and other birthing parents living with HIV, provider education, policy change, pushing for more research. And so, any help that you can bring to it, just know that, the chat that was going on around lactation support, that's a huge kind of part of this that often gets overlooked and is such a huge, support for women. And so I just want to say, take a look at the resources. Please sign up for the listserv so that you're engaged. Join the roundtable that's in May for more information and more thought leaders talking about this, including medical providers and folks that have been involved in research, and women living with HIV, and Catherine will be there too, hopefully. And so just, so we definitely look forward to your continued participation and all your feedback. And if anyone else has final words, please, please go forward, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Krista. This is great. And I'm really grateful that we can continue this conversation under VIVA. I'm excited about VIVA, that we can continue this conversation and collaboration this way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank
and
you.
We'll put out the recording in some post webinar communications.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to know you.
Have a great one. Bye.
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 Bye. Thank